Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to solve equations. They're not equations actually, they're called inequalities. And they're called inequalities because there is no equal sign in the sentence. There's actually what they call inequalities. And there's before we actually get into solving these and the rules that you need to use those, I want to go through what the different types of inequalities are. So we have basically 4 different types of inequalities. Let me write these down here. Okay, so you have what's called a greater than sign, and you're always reading going from left to right. So if the greater side is open, that's what you would call, so it's greater than. Here's the lesser than, smaller side, again reading left to right. You have the greater than or equal to, and then you have the less than or equal to. Now, there is another inequality, and it's basically this one, but we're not going to really concentrate on that in this particular lesson. We're just going to look at these 4 inequalities up here. Now, when you have an inequality sentence, you do basically the same thing that you would do as if it were an equation. Okay, so all the rules in terms of like adding and subtracting from the different sides and that sort of thing still hold. Now, in this particular equation, what I want to do is we want to solve for x. You can solve for any of the variables that are in here, but for this case we're going to solve for x. Okay? So we need to isolate the x variable. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 5y from both sides. Okay. And that's going to give me 2x is less than or equal to negative 6 minus 5y. Okay? Now, again, I'm almost ready to solve for the x. I'm just going to divide both sides by 2. Here's my third step. Divide by 2. Divide this whole side by 2, because remember, whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the same side, the same whole side on the other side. And you're going to end up with x is less than or equal to negative 6 minus 5y, all over 2. Now, this expression on this side can be written a couple of different ways. You can leave it the way it is, or you could also write what's called an equivalent expression. Let me just write that in there real quickly. Equivalent expression. And that would be where you make the denominator for both of the terms in the numerator. So you'd say negative 6 over 2 minus 5y over 2. And if you can reduce either one of these particular terms, you should do so. In this case, we can. So you're going to get negative 3 minus 5 over 2y, which is the same thing as 5y over 2. Okay? So this and this are called equivalent expressions. Now you'll notice that in solving this particular inequality, I really didn't do anything different than just a regular sentence, a regular equation, did I? Basically kept it the same. The only rule that you have to pay attention to for inequalities, and let me just write this here, is when, and we'll call this is the rule that distinguishes inequality. I should have said rule, but that's okay, I'll just leave it the way it is. When multiplying or dividing by a negative number, reverse the sign, reverse the inequality, I should say. All right, so what does that mean? Let's see if we can make that practical. Okay, how would we do that? So here's another example. We'll call this example 2. And let's just go with negative 2x plus 5y is less than or equal to negative 6. So notice that the difference here is, in the original equation up here, I had positive 2x plus 5y is less than or equal to 6. And here I've got a negative 2x plus 5y is less than or equal to 6. Let's see how that changes the answer. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 5y from both sides. And again, that does not change the direction of the sign, does it? Because that's not what the rule says, multiplying or dividing only. So now I have negative 2x is less than or equal to negative 6 minus 5y. Now watch what happens now. I'm going to divide both sides by a negative 2. Doing so, I can again cross out the negative 2 over negative 2, but that's going to change the direction of this sign because I'm divided by a negative number. So now I have x is greater than or equal to, again, negative 6 minus 5y all over negative 2, or the equivalent expression would be negative 6 over negative 2 minus 5y over negative 2. And look how it changes what's going on over here. That's now going to be a positive 3. That's going to be, you're subtracting a negative, so I'm going to be adding 5y over 2. So this number and this number, again, are equivalent expressions, and I have a greater than or equal to sign. Now, if you're confused about when to flip the sign, again, just go back up here, realize that it's multiplying or dividing by a negative number that causes this sign to flip. But another way to do it is just to insert numbers into the variables, and you'll see that it'll work differently that way. Okay? So that's a good way to check your answer. Okay, so in brief review, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different inequalities. We're pretty much only using these particular 4. Okay? You solve it exactly the way you would a regular equation. Don't forget equivalent expressions. And finally, the rule itself says when you multiply or divide by a negative number, reverse the inequality sign. So in this case, when I divided by the negative 2 on this step, I changed the direction of the sign. Again, had equivalent expressions, and if you want to find out whether it works or not, go ahead and plug in numbers and check your answer. Okay, I hope that was helpful.